Hello, everybody. My name is Joanna Nunez, and I'm with the ALS Association of North Carolina. I've been with them since 2012. Thanks for attending this session today. So, a really brief overview, just looking at sex in the US versus Europe. And this is just from the data. I'm not trying to stereotype or typecast anybody. Europe has much lower birth rates in teenagers than the US does. And we believe that this is due to a couple of things. In Germany, Norway, and Italy, they have a very progressive, open approach with their sex education. It starts at a young age appropriately, and they focus on truly education. They talk about the consequences of sex, like pregnancy and how to prevent that, STIs and STDs and how to prevent those. But they make sex a normal and regular part of growing up and maturing. In the US, many of our school-based approaches are religious focused or morality based, even in public schools. And often they're abstinence only. They don't really talk about options for sex other than not having sex. They've also found that many of the educators that are conducting these sex ed classes in the US are just coaches and teachers that haven't really had any training on it. So they're kind of reading off of a script and don't feel comfortable taking questions or opening up like class discussions. When our pals come to us, usually they already have a family, kids, sometimes grandkids. So we don't need to worry about sex education. But what we do need to kind of wonder and think about is maybe what was their initial attitudes towards sex growing up? Were they raised in a progressive environment or more of a shame-based environment? Were they given a lot of morality intertwined with sex? Were they told that you never, ever, ever discuss sex outside of the bedroom? Which, if you're at the doctor's office, that's outside of the bedroom. So they're not going to want to talk to you about it. These are just some things we need to consider when we are thinking about our pals and their upbringings. US World and Report did a study in 2020, right before COVID happened, about the most embarrassing or not talked about subjects with the doctors. And the three that they found the most were alcohol use, memory problems, and sex. And they attribute this to just being worried about bad news. If you go to the doctor and you're telling him that you're having some short-term memory problems, he could say that that's just a normal part of aging, or he could want to run a bunch of tests and maybe you'll find out some bad news from those tests. So it's just better not to bring it up. It's kind of how we think, right? We might have to change our lifestyle. They might want to talk to us about our diet, our exercise, our how much alcohol we're consuming, how many cigarettes we're smoking. We don't want to change that. So again, we won't bring it up. And maybe we're just inadequate. Like, I don't want to ask my doctor that because everybody probably already knows the answer and he's going to think I'm stupid if I bring that up. Then, if we're looking at it from a team perspective, we on the team can feel inadequate. We can feel embarrassed. And worst of all, a lot of our clinics are time based or have insurance restraints on them where we're trying to take time and spend time with the pals, but we don't have time to bring up a million different subjects. We're focusing on the respiration and the nutrition and everything that goes into a clinic visit. So I wanted to talk about a couple ways that we could kind of move these into our clinics without making it embarrassing and without making it seem like a big deal. The whole team, I know I have doctor up here, but the whole team needs to really just project being open and approachable. And your team members can ask directly. You know, you don't have to say, so how's the sex life? But you can ask, everything okay in the bedroom? Any kind of couple issues we need to talk about? Any partner issues? And as we learned in grad school, when you're talking about things like alcohol, you don't say, do you drink? You ask things like, how many drinks per week are typical? Because then it normalizes the idea of drinking, theoretically, and the patient's more likely to answer a little more honestly than a quick no. Another way to do this, if the direct approach is a little too much or a little too time consuming, is just create a little survey. Have it a scale from 0 to 10. Like 0, this is not an issue. We don't need to discuss it today. 10, this is a very important burning issue that needs to be brought up at my doctor appointment today. They can fill it out while they're waiting in the waiting room or while they're waiting in the room for the next staff member to come in, the next professional. Can have everything on it. It doesn't have to just be sex and intimacy. You can hide that. You can hide that among things like falls. Have falls been an issue since your last visit? Alcohol use, tobacco use, depression, sleep. Just putting it in there can really, you'd be surprised what people might circle. Another way to do that is kind of just putting a checklist. I know I've been to the doctor where you have to fill in your presenting problem. So I'm here for stomach pains today, and it's just an open field that you fill in. And then it sometimes has a little line underneath it that says anything else you'd like to discuss with the doctor today. Also a blank field that you just fill in. What about putting a checklist underneath those? Or obviously, for our pals that are coming to a multidisciplinary clinic, you don't necessarily have to ask their presenting problem. We know that. But what about a checklist with 20 or so issues? Again, fall risk, sex and intimacy, alcohol use, vision loss, hearing loss, sleep disturbances, urinating too frequently. I mean, just put them all in there. And this can lead to a couple things. It could lead to your patient checking every single box, and then you just politely tell them, oh, wow, I see that you have a lot of issues here that you want to discuss with the doctor. We might only have time for your top 3 today, but can we schedule a follow-up visit in a few weeks to cover the rest of these? Or the other thing that might happen is they don't check sex and intimacy or another topic that they really need to talk about. But the fact that they saw it on your paperwork kind of puts the idea in their mind that you're a safe space. This is a safe place to talk about it and that you're a resource. And it wouldn't be unusual for them to bring it up since it's already on your paperwork. So let's look at sex and ALS specifically. There are less than 30 published studies on ALS and intimacy. And when I started doing my work and research on this, I didn't think that was too unusual. I figured that must be the norm for all of the kind of heavier diseases out there. But then as I did more research, I found that cancer and intimacy have over 90 published studies, which of course is 3 times what we have. And that heart patients that have had like quadruple bypasses or major heart attacks, they're seen as rehabable, and there are entire guidelines for doctors and team members on how to approach heart patients in recovery, on how to make them physically active again and intimate again. So why are we not talking about it in our ALS clinics if all these other clinics can talk about it? Well, first we have to look specifically at ALS and how it affects intimacy. So obviously nerves and muscles. We know those are the biggest things attacked by ALS. And you kind of need really good muscle control, and you need your nerves working correctly to be intimate. Also, it's a respiratory issue. Sex is a cardio workout. So if you don't have the best respiration or the best O2 levels, that's going to prove a problem. Also, there's just logistics, like, is the PAL on a non-invasive vent? Can they take their mask off during that? Or does the mask need to remain on? Is engaging in physical activity, is that going to require use of a suction or a cough assist midway through? Just things that need to be thought about in this new normal. There's also so many indirect effects. We know both our patients and our caregivers are tired and have lack of sleep going on usually. There's also medications to look at. So many medications that our patients might be on could have side effects that lower the libido. Of course, the big 2 right now, riluzole and Radicava, don't have any associated sexual dysfunctions or sexual libido effects as side effects, but our patients are often on many other medications that can. Looking at the partner for a minute, and this of course assumes that their partner is their main caregiver, but even if they're the secondary caregiver, this is all still very valid and true. That partner's already probably anticipatory grieving. That just means that even though their pal is still alive and with them, they're thinking about the future. They're thinking about the future without them and the loss of all the plans that they were going to have together, the life they were going to have together. It can be really difficult when you want to be intimate with someone. It's also just fear. Am I going to hurt my pal? Am I too heavy for my pal? They can no longer push up off of me. They no longer have great leg strength. I don't want to injure them. So of course that would be something that needed to be talked about in clinic, right? To kind of engage in safe sex. And when we say safe sex with pals, we're not talking about preventing anything. We're talking about preventing an injury, basically. And then depression, as I kind of mentioned earlier. Depression is a real double-edged sword because we know that it kills libido just on its own. And then if you're on any medications, traditionally they have the side effect to lower libido. So that can really just wipe out the desire for sex in the caregiver. Then lastly, we're going to look at the caregiving role. Now, this was first studied in the 70s and 80s in the US specifically, and they were looking at pre and postnatal women in heterosexual relationships. And what they found was that many of the males in these heterosexual relationships would not want to be intimate with their female partners either after they conceived or after they gave birth because they had a new way of viewing their partner. They were no longer their wife or girlfriend. They were now the mother of their child. And it became almost like a Madonna aspect where they didn't want to, quote, dirty this person. Um, Obviously, that's a little different when it comes to pals and cows. But if you think about it as two partners that got married or got together kind of on equal footing, and then now one is almost completely indebted to the other for all of their basic ADLs, it can kind of feel like a mother-child relationship or a caregiver nurse, patient relationship. And that's not really sexy. So that can affect intimacy as well. So what we can do as a team is just take a team approach to this as we do with everything else that comes through our multidisciplinary clinics. Like I said, the respiratory therapist is going to get in there talking about breathing and breath control and how to use your ventilator and how to use the cough assist during the acts. The OT and the PT help them find workarounds. Do they need pillows, wedges, props? And by helpers, I mean, the little helpers that you buy in the specialty stores or in the back of a catalog, those kind of helpers. The social worker, I'm a social worker. We might just need to spend some time talking to them about redefining what is sex and intimacy. If the physical act of intercourse is just not possible anymore, how can you still be intimate with each other? Can you lie in bed together? Can you hold each other? Can you hold hands and look into each other's eyes? I still want you to be intimate and have a great life together. It just might be a little different than it used to be. So the $64,000 question is your team open to this approach? Took it to one of my teams. I won't call them out and say their name, but I asked them last week in clinic when I was doing some research on this, and they got very embarrassed and stuttery and said, "Oh, we don't know if we have time for that." So I will work on my clinics if you work on your clinics. And I told them it's all about getting comfortable. Let's get a sex therapist in here to train us about how to be clinical about this, but also approachable and appropriate and give off that you can talk to us vibe. There's trainings out there. Now, like I said, there's not a lot of literature published on this, so you might be doing some self-study or some independent study, but it's out there if you look, I promise. So I wanted to leave you with these resources. The very top one, Enabling Romance, A Guide to Love, Sex, and Relationships for the Disabled, was written by a husband and wife where the husband has a neuromuscular disorder. It's not ALS, but it affects him in a lot of the same similar ways that our ALS patients see. This is just a real, true kind of two people discussing their life and how they still have a sex life. And I would highly recommend it for our patients. I think it's a great read for us too. But if you want to give your patients something, that's the top one. And then the bottom two, Sexual Function in People with Disability and Chronic Illness and Sexuality and Chronic Illness are great ones for us as providers to read. And here's a little tip. buy one or two of these and put them on your bookshelf at work. And then if a patient sees it, they know you've got books on it at work. It's another little visual aid in saying, oh, they're open to talking about this. Lastly, these are some great websites, especially the Sexual Health Network. They have a lot of printouts, guidelines, things you can just leave out and leave around your office, leave around different rooms that people can browse while they're waiting. And again, that's a great way to facilitate a discussion. I wanted to thank all of you for attending this today. We should be going into a live question and answer session here in a second. And I'm so excited to hear your feedback, how you're doing this in your clinics or how you would like to do this in your clinics. And I hope to answer any questions that you have. So thank you very much for being here today, and I'll talk to you shortly.
Joanna, thank you so much for your presentation. I think regardless of the level of disability, research tells us how important sex and intimacy is to our patients, however kind of disabled they are. So it's a hugely important subject. Does anybody have any questions for Joanna? Oh, yes. Straight in front of me.
Thank you. I'm Sarah from ALS Canada. So our team has this conversation whenever a client asks us. Now, but one of the problems that we've had, we do have a fact sheet that talks about sexuality and intimacy, but it's really geared to people with an active sex partner. And I'm finding that I'm hitting a wall because that seems to be really a lot of the resources out there. And yet, over the years, the questions that I tend to get are often from single people who don't have an active partner. And then trying to access resources for these clients is really, really tough. So if you have any recommendations, I would love to hear them.
Absolutely. That second website, I know they said that the slides will be available and the re-recordings will be available. I just recently got a player in my clinic as well, a single man in his 40s, and a player plays the field. If you're not familiar with that term, he told me that he has quite a lot of girlfriends. And we just openly talked about some of the challenges he might face and, obviously when he would need to tell certain ones that he was closer to. If erectile dysfunction was going to play into it, I told him that was probably more of a neurology question, but I would help him address that with the neurologist so he wouldn't feel uncomfortable bringing it up, kind of man to man. I would be happy to be in the room when that subject came up. And I would say really that second website has great information, not just for partnered couples, but for anybody.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, yes, some virtual questions.
This is a question from in Australia. The National Disability Insurance Scheme pays for sexual therapists. Do you have such a scheme in the United States or elsewhere in the world?
I know that sexual therapy is now covered by some major insurances in the U.S. I know as close as 4 to 5 years ago, it was not. It was self-pay only. But I know, like, we're in North Carolina. I know of a very large clinic in North Carolina that accepts quite a few larger insurances, but it is something that even regular therapists that have a background and feel comfortable talking about sexual intimacy with clients could bill for without necessarily being billed as a sex therapist or a sex therapy session.
Is there another question? We have another question? Head over there.
Hey, Joanna, it's Lily. I'm waving at you. You can't see me, but I'm so excited. You did great. So you do phenomenal with facilitating groups virtually. And I just want to ask, how has that been, and have you brought that up in your support groups?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lily. She lobbed me a soft one there. I make that a topic at least once or twice a year. I usually don't put the word sex in it. I usually say intimacy in ALS, or intimacy, keeping the magic alive. I try to word it that way. And that's where I've gotten, honestly, my best feedback from pals and CALs that have taught me how they've had to redefine intimacy, and taught me as a social worker tips and tricks and resources that I can take with me into the clinic. Because of course our support groups are voluntary. I'm sure people might see that and get turned off or be afraid to come into that specific support group. But we also might have people like little wallflowers that are listening and have joined in that might not speak. And as many ways as we can get it out there and normalize it, I think the better.
Sarah has a question. They were first. Probably.
It's more a comment, really. I just wanted to point out that our partners at MNDA have a really fantastic guide that I really appreciate the work that they did on intimacy, and it's regardless of whether or not you're partnered or and it also is very inclusive. So, you know, with all different types of sexualities and approaches, and it's just a really wonderful resource. So I highly encourage everyone to take a look at it. We have a lot to learn. Beautiful quotes from people living with ALS and partners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also not a question. I just wanted to say, as a physical therapist, for different resources, I will be looking up the ones that you provided. Thank you so much. I often go to our local spinal cord injury rehab and just ask them what they're doing, and what, you know, so get some resources from them as well.
Thank you. Got one more over here. Oh, another question?
There are too many taboos about ALS and sex, especially from the partners. How can you reach out this problem in a ALS clinic?
So I think some of the general topics or some of the general suggestions, I don't know if you feel like they would help, but I think just making it as approachable as any of the other topics we bring up in ALS clinics. And even I know in our particular clinics in North Carolina, sometimes we have the person with ALS, they leave the room for a minute to go get weighed, or to walk down the hallway for the physical therapist so that they can see their gait or something like that. I would feel, as the social worker, I would feel very comfortable at that moment going in and saying to the partner, if that's who accompanied them, hey, while so-and-so's out of the room, is there anything you need to talk to me about? And there again, might have a checklist, or might just say, how are you guys doing on date night? How are you guys doing with alone time together? Just rewording it, but letting them know you're open and approachable to discussing that, I think would be a great way to get it into the clinic, especially for the spouses or the partners that are attending clinic with them.
Joanna, this is Kara. Thank you for a great presentation. I just want to remind the occupational therapists in the room, or those who work with OTs, that sexuality falls within the OT framework and is considered an activity of daily living, and something that OTs are trained to educate on. And there is an inventory called the Occupational Performance Inventory of Sexuality and Intimacy that I have not personally used as an OT, but have heard from some others that it has been very helpful to them in sort of starting conversations and exploring what needs to be discussed.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you for that. I think that's all the oh no, there's one more.
Hi, I'm Christine from Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I'm a social worker. And I had the luxury of being able to do a lot of home visits to do the advanced care plan. So I'd be in someone's home, they'd have a hospital bed set up in the middle of the dining room. And I remember one in particular where the wife asked me, she said, do you think that I can just get in bed with my husband and just lie next to him? And I said, well, absolutely. So any of you that have the luxury of doing home visits, and can be in that kind of situation. I didn't bring it up, she did. And it's just something to think about. Thank you.
There's still one final question.
Hi. I just have a situation that happened to me and one of my patients. I don't know if you could help me with this one. The patient was a man. He and his wife decided not to do more sexual intercourse, but then he said, "I want to see porn," and she said she wouldn't do that. She will not play that for him. Consideration, Colombia, there's no eye gaze devices. So every patient that needs to use a computer has to be used by someone else. And then he asked his nurse to do it, and that would be considered as sexual harassment by the boss, basically. So what would you do, and what would you recommend in that situation? I know it's a tricky one, but just want to get your
absolutely.
input.
Absolutely. I would have done two things in that situation. I would speak to the partner, the spouse privately, and say, what is the fear against the porn? Why are you not willing, not judging them, but if just let me know if you're not going to be a willing participant, that's fine. Maybe we can discuss that like privately, or I can refer you to someone so you can talk about your issues or your beliefs about porn. And I would have talked to him about, hey, who's a trusted friend? Like, every guy's got that one guy and every girl's got that one girl that like they're ride or die, that will come over and help them out with something. And I'd be like, look, my friend, this is going to be the weirdest request you ever get from me, but I need you to come over on Thursdays at 10 a.m. when wife is out shopping and press a DVD button for me. And you can leave the room. Actually, I'd prefer you to leave the room. I don't care what you do, but just need you to press play and come back in 30 minutes later and press stop. Because we definitely don't want to shame. I'm having some sexual education background and some sexual therapy background. They're big on not kink shaming, not ever making someone feel upset for what they prefer. And so that's where my thought of coming and talking to the partner first, why is porn such an issue with you? Is that something we can work through, or no? Is it okay if he has another person come turn it on for him? And then making that the most natural thing in the world for him.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Joanna, for your presentation.
Thank you all so much, and thank you, North Carolina chapter, for having my back.